Ladies and gentlemen, MrCropper here, joined by Ed Lecore for episode 1 of Brain Porn. We're going to bat around a few subjects and talk about the things that are on the news, but with slightly more intellectual bend or something like that. So, Ed, from joining us from a small village in London, or small village in England, I mean, is going to be discussing basically American politics with us today. Hillary, 9/11, Gary Johnson, etc.
Yes.
What's the first thing you want to start with, Ed?
Let's start with Hillary Clinton, because it's interesting watching this unfold. Because what's basically happened is there's been those in the American population who are distrustful of Hillary Clinton and the Democrats and the government in general have been obsessively gathering bits of evidence to indicate she has serious health problems. The idea being that not only does she have serious health problems, but also they're keeping it secret. And it turns out that they have been. And supposedly she was diagnosed with pneumonia on Friday, and they're only now telling us this they told us this on Sunday, because she was videotaped collapsing at the 9/11 memorial, and so they can't keep a secret anymore. And the interesting thing is the way that the left have been dealing with this, and the mainstream media, because among those people who have been saying there's something seriously wrong with her has been Alex Jones. And so what's happened is the left have got into this clever strategy where people point out the obvious. She has been coughing, she has been staggering, she has been exhibiting all sorts of traits for weeks now, which doesn't quite fit with pneumonia, but whatever. She might have it, she might not, we don't know. I don't believe a word anything that comes out of the Hillary camp says, neither should anyone else. But okay, let's just go with pneumonia. She's been ill for a while, she has serious health problems. The media have been doing everything they can to basically poo-poo anyone who points this out. And everyone's been pointing it out. Anybody who isn't in the tank for Hillary can see her staggering, can see her coughing, can see her bizarre facial tics that she's been doing. The media around her, the actual people, literally the people standing in front of her with the microphones, you see in their faces their reactions when she has one of these facial tics. This isn't something that's been sort of cut out of footage. This is something that happens live, and everybody is disturbed by it. So what the mainstream media have been doing, and this is a good giveaway. You want to know which media pundits and channels are in the tank for Hillary, just look at who's trying to cover up her health issues, because they have no reason to do so other than pure partisanship. And so what they are doing now is, because the evidence for her health problems are obvious, they're obvious in all the footage, they're obvious in lots and lots of diagnoses. Lots of doctors have been weighing in on this and doing kind of half official diagnoses. I mean, not really, but it's one of those things where lots of doctors have been putting their reputations on the line, saying, look, she has something seriously wrong with her. So there's a lot of people concerned about her health, but because one of those people is Alex Jones, what they are doing now, the mainstream media, is saying, oh, well, Alex Jones says this, Alex Jones says that. Alex Jones says, oh, well, it's an EpiPen. Some of his diagnoses are incorrect because, he's Alex Jones. He's not the greatest critical thinker in the world, but he has got some of it right. She does have health problems. There is a cover-up. The media are trying to shut down anybody who tries to bring it up. And it's just interesting how what they've done is they have built up Alex Jones and InfoWars. They're now getting more hits than ever before because they keep getting mentions. Hillary Clinton has mentioned them. Rachel Maddow's been mentioning them. So, MSNBC, CNN have been talking about Alex Jones, talking about InfoWars as a way of discrediting all the actual criticisms coming from everybody else. That's the point here. The people who have been worried about her health have been a lot of people. A lot of independents have been worried about it. A lot of conservatives have been putting it out. A lot of libertarians have been putting it out. I've been putting it out. I've seen a lot of the video footage. There's something very strange with her health going on. She's got lesions on her tongue. She's got all sorts of, because she had a fall that resulted in a brain clot. And there's a high chance that brain clot has caused complications. So these are serious health issues that the public deserve to know. I'm all for privacy, but the American public deserve to know the entire health condition of someone who's trying to be the most powerful person in the world. Yes, the American people are entitled to it. Don't know whether I am, but the American people are. And the point is that because Alex Jones does actually occasionally do good research. That's a good thing about conspiracy theorists. Every now and again they luck out and they do actually do good research on something. they are using him as a byword for any criticism and any narrative and any theory that they don't like and they wish to keep secret. And so because Alex Jones is partisan, he is a partisan, he is anti-globalist, he is anti-Clinton, he is anti-Democrat, vehemently so, he will go after them at every opportunity, which means he's always going to be among those criticizing and among those pointing out something suspicious is going on. So now what the media can do is they can put every single criticism and every single just question that people have about what's going on the left under the banner of conspiracy theory of Alex Jones. Because, as I say, people have been pointing out health issues with her for quite some time. Some of the points they've made are valid. Some of the points they've made were not valid. The EpiPen carried by the security guard turned out to be a flashlight. But they keep saying, oh, it's an EpiPen. It's an EpiPen. They said it was an EpiPen. They got that wrong. Yeah, they're going to get it wrong because they're trying to figure out what on earth's going on. And the Hillary Clinton camp can't be trusted to tell the truth ever. And the media are in the bank for Hillary Clinton. And so, as demonstrated by the fact, look at all those who specifically employed this strategy. Look at those who drew attention to Alex Jones in the context of mentioning the health concerns. They're the ones that are truly in the tank. Those are the ones that we definitely cannot trust, because those are using this strategy. If Alex Jones said something along with everybody else, then use Alex Jones to smear everybody else as a conspiracy theorist, even when they turn out to be right. So it's a strategy we need to look out for. Alex Jones is the new scapegoat, the new sort of tool for dismissing this. And Alex Jones is noticed
by mentioning him, by giving him mentions, they're steering towards his channel people who, on average, are going to have a hard time seeing through his nonsense. Some of them are just going to dismiss it as conspiracy, but anyone who watches several of his videos is going to have a hard time seeing through all the questions he raises and stuff. Yes. So I think that's quite funny. They're steering people towards him who are going to believe a lot of the stuff.
Because sometimes he's right, and that's going to lend credibility to the rest of it. Because Rachel Maddow and the rest of the media in the tank for Hillary, the rest of the totally, utterly, this isn't liberal bias, this is Marxist bias, basically. This is agitprop, this is pure Orwellian propaganda. But that's MSNBC. But the point is that when they tried to smear legitimate concerns about our health, because remember, the left did the same thing with McCain's health. They made a big deal about McCain's health. Oh, he's so old, he can't do this, he can't do that. And so this is just the usual hypocrisy. The left and the right basically accuse each other of things, and then they do exactly the same thing to each other when the tables are turned, because they're both raving hypocrites. Because that's partisan politics for you. But the point is that now people are going to remember, because now it's out and she does have health problems, people are going to remember, I remember them saying it was just an Alex Jones conspiracy. Maybe I should look into this Alex Jones guy because he was right about this. Yeah. And the problem is that I worry that they're going to buy into stuff when he says things like GMOs are satanic.
Yeah.
Which is unfortunate.
I was thinking about that, about the Islam is Marxism. And they've tried Marxism with atheism. That didn't work. They've tried Marxism with racism, nationalism. Yeah. That didn't work. They tried.
Well, it is working. I mean, Black Lives Matter are Marxists.
That's nothing compared to Islam. Yeah. Islam's huge.
Yeah.
And the reason is because it's Marxism, and they don't have to tag along with atheists or statists or nationalists. It's a religion. So all the people who used to have religious opposition to Marxism no longer can have religious opposition, because now it's being paraded around by a religion.
Yeah. So well, I mean, there are a lot of Muslims who know that Marxism is infiltrating their ideology and object to that. So that you do, some of the hardcorers like ISIS and Taliban specifically have statements saying we reject communism, we reject Marxism, because they know it's going on.
Well, they how could they reject? I mean, of course, they might say they reject it when they practice it, just like Hitler was against Marxism while he practiced it.
Yeah. Well, he was a socialist, but a non-Marxist socialist in a sense. He identified as a socialist, but was against Bolshevism. He was at most a variation of Menshevik Marxism. So very different kind of Marxist to the type that was the majority at the time. But yes, you're correct. It's all variations upon the same thing. But the problem is that when you're dealing with people who are opposing this and don't have critical thinking skills any more than Marxists do, you end up basically having very little choice but to go with the least nuttiest person, which is still way nuttier than they should be. And one of the ironies of Alex Jones is that he recognizes that climate change, a lot of that stuff, is just an excuse to control the economy, to attack the industrialization, even of the developing world. You know, because Black Lives Matter UK are now saying that climate change is racist, and they're basically, because they've tied it up with post-colonial narratives. And so what they're doing is they're basically saying that the industrial world, the Western world, should feel guilty and is for terrible things happening in Africa. It's all our fault. We're making it hotter in Africa and all that kind of stuff. It's all white guilt exploitation. And the problem is that it's the anti-GMO thing is the same thing. It's people in the first world who are using hatred of science, using hatred of Western civilization to try to attack science and to attack progress, and in ways that actually undermine the developing world. Because the developing world needs fossil fuels and GMOs. Those are two things that they need. And so the attacks on both of those things are both attacks on the developing world by first world sanctimonious self-righteous racists who don't care that their worldview is going to destroy huge numbers of lives, because they have, cue copyright phrase, temporal myopia. They don't care about the results of their actions, and they don't care about the past. You know, the climate change people, for example, the climate change hysterics, they don't care that their predictions have been wrong over and over and over again, and they don't care what the results of their predictions will be. Undermining fossil fuels is undermining the development of the developing world. And attacking GMOs and trying to ban GMOs, again, attacks the actual physical well-being of people in the developing world.
Yeah, now...
But the weird thing is... Yeah, the weird thing is that Alex Jones is both, he sees through the ideological agenda of climate change hysteria, but he thinks that GMOs are part of a conspiracy.
On GMOs, that's interesting, because the crops were able to get them to do things that otherwise we would need more pesticides, or we would need careful planning of the farm, or we would need special machinery to go pick the weeds out between, but we can just make them be immune to pesticide killer or weed killer or whatever. We can do all kinds of things with genetic engineering, which saves us labor or time or machinery or effort.
Well, specifically with something like golden rice, it has, I think, vitamin D or E,
right,
and it's absolutely necessary. It saves millions of lives.
Yes, but it just, in the Western world, it saves us some capital or some time or some labor.
Yeah.
In the developing world, they don't have a workaround. You know, if they don't have a crop that's immune to certain bugs, they're not going to have that crop because they can't get rid of those bugs. They don't have money for pesticides, or they can't make fields, they can't get clean water, whatever the problem is. They cannot grow the crop that doesn't have certain bugs in it because genetic engineering. Yeah. So we're making it possible for the third world. It's not just more difficult for them, it's just plain not possible for them to grow something.
Every single leftist policy, every single environmentalist policy, and every single anti-GMO policy is screwing the third world over, is screwing the developing world completely. And what's their response? To basically blame the West. The only source of hope for the developing world is the West. But without our capitalism, without our free market principles, without rule of law, without our GMOs, and without our fossil fuel-based industrialization, the developing world is screwed. They can't just go from pre-feudal to solar panels in a single jump. The Greens and the liberals and progressives live in their spoilt first world, alternative green energy world, and not only is that not even working in our side. In the developing world, there's huge problems with a lot of solar panel, a lot of wind generators, but they think that A, it works, and that B, you can straight away apply that to the African world. You can in very limited numbers, but you need mass industrialization. You need energy to be A, concentrated, and B, constant as a source. And you can't get that with green energy because it is not concentrated and it is basically intermittent. It's not constant. So by the very nature of green energy right now, at least, it's useless for most of the developing world. They desperately need fossil fuel-based industrialization.
Tesla is trying to change that by putting a big fuck-off battery in your house that your solar panels would charge up during the day and you use it at night. And that's great because everybody in Africa has enough money for a huge fuck-off battery the size of a suitcase.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, the developing world has to develop the way that we did. How do we develop? We develop through industrialization, through mass industrialization, to companies and factories, and that would eventually disperse. Because when the factories first developed, the people who went to work in the factories were in hovels with no running water, with no electricity. But eventually, the technology spread from the factories, spread from the industrialization to the houses through the funding of infrastructure, through the actual wages of the employees, etc. And that's the only way that a middle class and an affluent society has ever developed historically. And there's no reason why any other way would work, because every single time anyone has ever tried any other way, it's been a disaster. Because they're following an ideological pattern rather than historical. This is another example of temporal myopia. They're not seeing the history of the developing world and how we and why we developed. Instead, they just see, oh, well, we developed, therefore we did something wrong. Therefore, because they operate with a zero-sum game. Anything that we do to succeed must have been done at the cost of someone else. We can't develop as a result of our own principles.
If we look at what the world looked like, let's say 100 years ago, right before World War I started, it looked a hell of a lot better than it does today. There were more parts of it that were freer and had, trains running in them and basic civilization and courts and police and stuff.
Yes.
And now a lot of those places have fallen to fucking pieces.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of pieces of Asia now that they're starting over. There are societies that are just getting to the point where they have order again. 100 years ago, they looked pretty good before everything fell apart for World War I and before Britain withdrew from like 60 different countries. You guys left Kenya, and all kinds of places up and down in Africa, Iraq, the whole Middle East. You were occupying that till what, 1924 is when you left Iraq?
Yeah. Yes, I mean, this is the problem. They want to blame colonialization, the post-colonialists in the far left, but it's not colonialization that screwed them up. It's the end of colonialization that screwed them up.
Everything was fine.
Because they were developing a lot better before colonialization. They had no rule of law. They had no justice system worth a damn. They had no principle of constitutional rights at all. I mean, the Middle East still doesn't. And then they were just beginning to industrialize. We were building infrastructure. The left love going on about infrastructure. Well, how about the infrastructure built by colonialists and the imperialists? They could talk about exploitation all they like, but at the end of the day, in terms of pure objective facts, in terms of quality of life, level of technology, quality of law, look at Shanghai and Hong Kong. Shanghai and Hong Kong are bustling centers of prosperity, far, far higher than anywhere else within 100-mile, 200-mile radius. Why? Because they're products of colonialism. They have rule of law and limited government, and that's all it takes to create prosperity. Now, because everything else capitalism and the free market will just take care of itself. Capitalism, free market, unlike Marxism and socialism, doesn't have to be imposed via a centralized authority. It'll just occur on its own.
India is a different story. What you guys did with India, you stuck around there longer, and
got taken over by a bunch of socialists, though. India was screwed up before we arrived anyway. India had been invaded by the Mughal Empire, by the Islamic world, and been completely decimated. It wasn't us that screwed it up. They were a prosperous civilization with libraries and great civilization. The Indians were astounding civilization. And then the Mughal Empire came in, burnt all the libraries down, and killed 80 million of them. Biggest genocide in human history.
Nice.
And we just came in and picked up the pieces.
And you guys left a functioning democracy there, socialist maybe.
Yeah, biggest democracy in the world.
Yeah.
Do we get any credit for that? Nope.
You haven't gotten any calls lately from anybody saying that.
Well, no, I mean, it's the relationship between India and England is pretty good. I mean, we have a lot of Indians living in India, in England, and they're fantastic. You know, I happily, I grew up around Hindus and Sikhs. They're the nicest people in the world. They're fantastic because their religions, Hinduism and Sikhism are pretty good religions. I mean, Sikhism is a beautiful religion. Every single time some brainwashed leftist PC fucktard tries to describe Islam, I just hear a description of Sikhism. Everything that they say about Islam is actually true of Sikhism. Sikhism really does treat women very well. Sikhism really does have a wonderful set of principles. But it was You know why? Because it was deliberately created as a reaction against Islam. They basically looked at Islam, and because the earliest gurus were constantly being persecuted by Islam. Sikhism grew out of a sort of clash between Hinduism and Islam, and they sort of took bits from both, but they were constantly being persecuted when Sikhism was being developed. 2 out of 10 of the great gurus of Islam who were beheaded by the forces of Islamic occupation in India. So this is a religion which learnt a lot of lessons from Islam and avoids all the same kind of principles deliberately. For example, they're non-exclusivistic and they're non-absolutist. Those are central tenets of Sikhism. So
now, they never rebelled against Brits.
Well, they kind of did. I mean, it's difficult to. Some of them rebelled. There were Sikh rebellions, but there were also a lot of times when the Sikhs fought and very well and died as heroes in the First and Second World Wars.
Right.
And as I say, Sikhs are absolutely outstanding members of the British community.
Right. Now, India, you guys didn't withdraw from India because it was like Vietnam for America. No.
We basically parted on pretty good terms.
Right.
Gandhi deliberately wanted Britain and India to part on good terms.
Now that, cause I actually see that when I meet, when I talk to Indian people here in America, they treat what they perceive as educated white people, I guess, they treat them with deference and respect.
Yeah.
And I thank the British for having put that over there.
Well, because the British occupation of India was not the best thing in the universe. Unfortunately, a lot of the people running the India were Malthusians.
Yeah.
And I shouldn't have to tell you what's wrong with that. It's eugenics. It's seriously messed up stuff. We see that kind of mindset in environmentalists, when they talk about how there's too many millions here, there's too many billions here. Some leading environmentalists have said that we need to get rid of 2-3 billion people. They have we're overpopulated. There's too many people. They have this obsession with the idea there's too many people around. And it is a serious mindset. I mean, and it's disturbing because Malthusian calculations are always wrong. They always, same thing with, because it was the Malthusian calculations that caused people to say in the 70s that like 1 billion people would be starving to death by the late 70s, early 80s. And what happened? Norman Borlaug and the Green Revolution basically put a stop to that.
Yeah.
He saved over 1 billion lives. And the point is that they didn't see it coming because for the same reason that socialists and Marxists never see any free market triumphs coming. Yeah. They don't understand that solutions are solved from the bottom up, not the top down. That's why central planning is always wrong, because solutions are never developed by a ruling elite. This is Plato. This is Plato's government that we're talking about here.
One thing that's happening right now is that natural gas is becoming extremely cheap because of the revolution in fracking technology. And natural gas is the feedstock for fertilizer plants. They take natural gas, they cool it down, change the molecules a bit, turns into fertilizer, then they sell it. So fertilizer is going to be coming down drastically over the next few years in price. It probably already has halved in price.
Yeah.
So, and that'll continue to happen if natural gas continues to be cheap, and they're finding enormous reserves of natural gas now that this fracking technology allows different formations to be tapped.
And the lesson to take from that is that you can't predict the future. That you have to understand the economy in terms of bottom up, and you need as much freedom as possible to increase the likelihood of it's natural. It's like natural selection. In natural selection, you have variety among a gene pool, and the greater the variety, the greater the chances that there will be a positive mutation that could be selected for. So, natural selection only selects positive mutations for any given environmental situation, and positive mutations are rarer than negative ones. Negatives are very common, neutrals are very common, but positives are very rare. It's the same thing with the market. The people who succeed, the business ideas that succeed, the entrepreneurs that succeed, they're the minority. Most business ideas fail. Most businesses fail. The small businesses fail. Same thing. You need as much variety as possible in order to have the greater chances of success, which buoys up the entire remaining economy. And that's why you need freedom. That's why you need economic freedom to increase the chances of success, which in turn impacts the rest of the market. The overall average increase in economic development, the overall aggregate level of success is determined by the amount of actual successes on an individual level, on a single business level or whatever. And that is determined by the likelihood of that occurring, which is determined by the level of variety, which is determined by the level of freedom.
The metaphor of a natural selection you were just talking about,
Yeah.
To carry that metaphor forward just a little bit, capitalism is like a jungle where,
Yeah.
like you said, 90% of businesses fail. At least after 10 or 20 years, 95% of them are gone.
Yeah.
In any given year, 50% of new businesses fail. So you've got a tremendous amount of death compared to longevity.
Yeah.
So where capitalism is a jungle, let's say, socialism or communism would be like a zoo, where it's like,
Yeah.
we've got a lion here called Volvo. Sweden has this lion called Volvo. What do we do with it? We put it in a cage, we protect it, we feed it, we don't let it come to any danger at all.
Yes.
You know, what do we do with the lions
ultimately
in the jungle? They all kill each other, they might die, who knows? But we've got more lions.
Yeah,
So,
because they have a sustainable population. Zoos are not a sustainable population. I mean,
Right.
it would, without a broader natural selection environment to draw upon, zoos would have just a bunch of inbred idiots that eventually will die off.
this is that's a perfect metaphor for society, for capitalism and socialism.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, because as I say, society is bottom up. Morals, education, all these various principles of economics, we make mistakes. We make terrible mistakes. We are a very flawed species. There are no saviors, there are no messiahs, there are no Führers, there are no czars, there are no kings, there are no emperors, there are no philosopher kings who are going to save us. There are no Marx or Solinskis who have all these great ideas and all these genius insights that are going to save us. At the end of the day, we're flawed human beings who are going to F it up most of the time, and so we have to have a system which accounts for reality, that accounts for the fact that we're flawed human beings, which is why you have to have freedom. You have to allow for the mistakes to be made, and you also have to allow for the successes. And the problem with a lot of social security systems or welfare systems is that they smother the successes along with the failures, resulting in an overall lowering of success. Anyway, should we go to a next topical subject?
Yeah, what's the next thing we shall go to? What do you propose?
Gary Johnson.
Okay, Mr. Johnson screwed up his Aleppo thing. I think it might be funny. What if he thought that they were asking about a Aleppo, and he was wondering what a Aleppo is?
Yeah, because I don't know what Aleppo is, do you? Oh, there you go. Perfectly understandable. Yeah, well, the problem is, this is the problem with libertarianism. They're not empirical. They apply a narrow ideology to foreign affairs. They have a limited government model, a non-interventionist model, which is their ideology, period. And they apply that to foreign affairs, and it's similar to multiculturalism. You see this in the left all the time. Multiculturalists never learn about other cultures. Why bother? They're all equal. If you are operating on the idea that all cultures are equal, like all races are equal, before we decided all races are equal through logic and reason, there was huge amounts of research and a lot of public scientific debate in Darwin's time in particular about what races were. Are they different species? Are they more intelligent than us, less intelligent? What exactly is going on here? When we decided that they were all races were equal, the amount of research and interest in that subject died down, at least on the public level. And it wasn't that necessary anyway. But same things happen with multiculturalism. Multiculturalists don't bother to study other cultures because they're all equal. And if you say that the one culture is better than another culture, you're a racist or you're a bigot. That's how they operate because they're demented. They're moral nihilists. Because cultures, of course, have profoundly different moral values. And to say that all cultures are equal is to say that all profoundly different moral values are the same, which is moral nihilism. And unfortunately, libertarians have the same approach because they basically regard all foreign intervention as bad. They basically just don't bother looking at all the examples of foreign intervention, some of which are good, some of which are bad. In other words, to them, the Korean intervention was the same as the Vietnamese intervention. The Iraqi intervention is the same as the intervention in Japan or Germany after the Second World War. But one was a success and the other was a failure for very specific reasons. The situation was different, the methodology was different, the philosophy that was imposed was different. America rehabilitated Germany and Japan to a spectacular degree of success in an extremely short period of time. Japan and Germany became economic successes very, very quickly after the Second World War. Despite the fact that literally they were dropping more bombs on Germany in incendiary bombs than at any time in human history. And Japan, of course, got nuked.
Now,
So they were able to take countries at the lowest ebb and rehabilitate them.
It's been 25 years now since we went into Iraq.
Yeah.
1991 was the first Iraq invasion. 25 years. What year is 25 years after the end of World War II? That's 1970.
Yeah.
And by 1970, come on, Japan was threatening the American auto industry with Toyota by 1970.
Yeah, and you see, and that's the point here. The libertarians don't learn the right lessons, and it's partly because the Libertarian Party was founded in 79, sometime in the 70s.
Really?
Their perspective is just the last few decades of foreign policy disasters. I mean, Vietnam was a disaster, everything else. But the problem is that even fairly recent, even in the Korean War, there was success because South Korea is an infinitely better country than North Korea in every respect. The difference is American intervention. The problem is that the philosophy that has overtaken the American government and the foreign policy initiatives are based on ideological garbage, neocon philosophy, all sorts of some altruistic philosophies where we go in and we help them, we rebuild them and that kind of stuff. We rebuilt Germany and Japan because we recognized it was in our own self-interest, because these were power players who were broken and we had to fix them so that they would be able to create peace and stability, and also so that we could trade with them. I mean, America and Britain have benefited enormously from trade with Japan and Germany. Enormously. Yeah. It was in our own, we were operating in self-interest. Whereas with Iraq, it was an altruistic enterprise. We were going to sacrifice our own troops. We were going to spend $2 trillion in order to rebuild a country that wasn't Japan. Japan and Germany were civilized countries that went evil. Iraq is not a civilized country. It hasn't been a civilized country in centuries. No Middle Eastern country is civilized outside of Israel.
Yeah.
I mean, they are literally 1,000 years behind us. They didn't have an enlightenment. They didn't even have a renaissance. They are centuries behind us. The idea that you could rehabilitate in such a short, even shorter period of time than Japan and Germany were rehabilitated with even less troops is insane. That's absolutely insane.
Gary Johnson makes me so nervous because he would try to pull the troops out and wouldn't. Yeah. And you mentioned Korea as a success, Japan, Germany a success. I think Vietnam was a success because we stood there for 15 years fighting communism. Yeah. If we would have just let them take that, then what was the next thing? But we stopped them. It took 15 years for them to muddle through.
Well, I mean, it was very badly done. Vietnam was botched to a tremendous degree, and in many.
Would it be better to have let them take it?
Well, less people might have died, because a lot of people died when the Viet Cong took South Korea, but partly because of the anger.
If they took it at no expense, then what would they have done? Stopped there, or would they have gone on to some other?
Yeah, but the thing is, there wasn't all that much. There wasn't much of a domino effect. I mean, after Vietnam, what do? They basically took the place and then they just ran it into the ground because they're communists. Well, and now communists have to learn. They have to learn from their mistakes. You have to let them make their mistakes. This is why Ayn Rand said no intervention with the Soviet Union. Let them die. Right. Because they have to learn their mistakes. There was no point in antagonizing the Soviet Union. The country has to learn. And this is true of Vietnam. Vietnam is very pro-capitalist now because they have learned for a fact. And it's the same thing with Bernie Sanders supporters. I'd half be in favor of Bernie Sanders becoming president just so these smug millennials will finally learn what everybody else in the world has been telling them, that this stuff doesn't work. They need to learn. They need to learn firsthand, because apparently that's the only way anybody learns anything anymore, because they're so too stupid to understand history.
Have you heard
about temporal myopia?
Do they tell you about what's going on in Obamacare, or is it? Have you seen online what's happening?
Well, we have a situation far worse than Obamacare. So we're looking at America and we're saying, "You're complaining about that? Wow!"
I mean, everybody thought that it was going to work out in X, Y, or Z way, and it's not. It's working the way that Breitbart said it was. It's raising the price. So yes. Now it looks like all insurance companies are set to double all of their rates, and about 19 of them.
Because at the end of the day, the left want to destroy all insurance companies. They've been saying this for decades. I mean, progressives were saying this during the Bush years, that all insurance companies are evil and must all be destroyed. And so, yeah, it'll end up destroying insurance companies, but that's the point. I mean, if you look at what the rationale that the left are using right now is that Obamacare is a botched, terrible, bad version of it. Because you know how they are. Every single example of their ideology is a failure. And so it can never be a real true Scotsman. It's always a failure because of some other factor, and if only they get the chance to do it, as Rand said, our gang will get it right.
Yeah.
And so they're using the failure of Obamacare to go even further.
Yeah. They'll
Because
say,
again, because this is what happened with Mao and Stalin and Pol Pot. The more they applied their ideas, the more of a failure it was, and the more they had to come up with excuses in order to justify even more applications of the same principles.
well, the only way they're going to be able to get around what's happening now is by some sort of waiting lists or rationing, because what happened was they gave people insurance and people went to the doctor and the dentist and got stuff fixed.
Yeah.
And there was no limit on what, there's not so now they're putting limits, they're making rations. The amount of money you can get free health care, but you can only get a certain amount.
Yeah, well, the NHS is just one giant waiting list. I mean, in my country. So what do you expect?
Lists and stuff over there, and that's what we'll end up with.
Yeah, government monopoly equals poor quality and massive waiting lists. That's how it always works. That's why the DMV is so terrible in America. That's why here. But back to Gary Johnson, the problem is that they have a one-size-fits-all approach to foreign policy. Their ideology is purely inductive. It's not deductive. They're not taking from the actual facts. If you look at some of the more hawkish conservatives, which I think are closer to correct, they have a very detailed understanding of what goes on in the world. America is America. The rest of the world is the rest of the world. You can apply libertarian principles to America, a single country with certain principles already in place. Libertarian domestic policy, I think, would work very well. But foreign policy, the rest of the world has different cultures, different countries, different laws, different governments with completely different agendas, completely different ideologies. You can't apply libertarian principles to all of that and expect it to fit. It doesn't work. You have to take into account, you have to be empirical, and you have to be deductive. You have to take into account all the different value systems and cultures and ideologies and governmental philosophies that are at work in all these different societies. So many different situations, so much variety. A one-size-fits-all approach, a non-interventionist approach, isn't going to work in every case.
Yeah,
the problem is that because libertarians have that one-size-fits-all approach, like with going back to the multiculturalists, they tend to be very, very sloppy and ignorant. Multiculturalists never bother to study other cultures because they have a one-size-fits-all dogma, and libertarians don't bother studying a lot of foreign policy stuff because, again, they just see explosions on the news that think, well, that's what happens when we intervene. And so people like Gary Johnson just assume that, well, the problem is our intervention. So if we get out, things will get better. But the problem with that philosophy is that the power vacuum it creates sucks in some of the worst evils imaginable. We are not the worst thing in the world. The problem with libertarians is they bought into this post-colonial narrative that we are the main problem with the rest of the world. They ignore all the positives that American intervention has created, as we've listed. And they basically say, we're the worst problem. And they have this naive view that Putin isn't that bad. The Chinese aren't that bad. Iran isn't that bad. Yes, they are. They're far worse than America could ever possibly be.
Yeah, that's what scares me about Gary Johnson. He thinks in a platonic way about other countries and other cultures and about conflict as such. Platonically speaking, he can just apply his idea to it and have a solution. He doesn't have to reference the real world because he's dealing with ideas that are perfect and above the real world.
Yeah, well, Obama and Kerry are cultural Marxists. They apply a post-colonial perspective to Iran, which is why they're so spectacularly naive. I mean, the Iranians chanting death to America, we want to turn Tel Aviv into glass. And they're like, oh, they don't mean it. That's just a PR thing. Like like the Iranian government is democratically accountable or something. And no, it's not PR. It's what they really believe. And so they have this naivety that beggars belief because they see everything in post-colonial terms. America's the bad guy. Every other country would be a lot better if we just left them alone. They'd somehow be more moral. They'd somehow be nobler. All the evils of the world are just reactions to our evil, which is racist as hell because it just assumes that every other culture in the world and every other race doesn't operate according to their own minds and their own ideas, their own goals. They have no goals of their own. There are no ideologies of their own, no inherent values that are relatively moral or immoral, depending. And that all they're doing is just mindlessly reacting and responding to the West. They have no goals of their own. They have no agenda of their own. And that's disgusting because in the case of Muslim countries, their imperialistic agenda is 1,000 years older than America. I mean, they've been invading and occupying and slaughtering their way across the face of the earth, fighting from continent to continent for a millennium before America came into existence. So the idea that all the stuff in the Middle East is America's fault is ridiculous. They were evil, psychotic, violent barbarians before America arrived, and before Britain arrived, before the European colonials arrived, and afterwards. The only time they ever weren't like that is when we had our boots on their throats. Because at the end of the day, that's the only way they learn. 19th century saw a period of incredible peace and prosperity. Why? Because the British Empire didn't let the Middle Easterners get away with shit.
Yeah.
And this isn't about race. This isn't about imperialism. This is simply about law and order. This is about rule of law. It's the same thing with BLM wanting the police to get out of black communities. No, the opposite would actually benefit black communities. They need rule of law. You need it in order to build a civilization, in order to have a prosperous economy, in order to have justice, in order to have anything. You need rule of law. And
I think we had our chance in the 1970s to go down a non-racist direction, and we decided to do affirmative action, which is a racist law. And so because of that, everyone's been talking about how important the color of your skin is, and they've just never given up on it. They're obsessed with it. Now, Stanford University is going to have segregated dorms for black kids and white kids.
Yep, here we go again. Because they ignored the lessons of Booker T. Washington, who basically said that the black community has to build up entirely on their own. They can't rely upon handouts from white people. Mainly, of course, because they were already getting handouts when they were slaves. I mean, that's what slavery is. It's a welfare system, basically. You don't work. You don't work for money. You work for handouts. And so that's why some of the socialists that I was debating with earlier were basically saying that the kind of society they want is 100% tax, where nobody works for money and everything gets handed to them by the state. That is slavery. And they don't see that that's what their ideology logically leads to. All leftist ideology is an incremental process towards slavery.
It's bizarre because the state is not a good daddy. It's never nice. So
I mean, the Western civilization has had this problem before. This is what destroyed the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire was one giant welfare state, and it was economically stagnant as a result.
They had bread and circus ticket giveaways, and
bread and circuses. That's all it was. Bread and circuses is basically just cable TV and food stands.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, you didn't have a free market in the Roman Empire. It was horrifically stagnant. The Roman Empire was like the Soviet Union of its time. It was just doomed. It was so sad. It could have been so much more.
Yeah,
but again,
800 years. What if America could last 800 years? I mean, if we count Britain as the beginning and say the glory of Britain starts in 1700 with the Industrial Revolution, and we're at 300 years right now. So
you can't predict. Remember, we can't predict the future. We're not Marxists. We're not central planners. We're not going to be able to predict all the innovations and changes that are going to occur. The moment you think you can, that's when you become a despot.
Well, okay, did Ayn Rand predict the future when she said Russia is incompetent?
Yes. But the thing is, she was basically she was using a very simple principle. She wasn't making predictions about the West. She was making predictions about the absence of free markets, and you can predict that easily. You can predict what communists are going to do, Marxists. I mean, all the stuff going on in Venezuela right now, South Africa, anti-communists and anti-Marxists have been pointing out that these countries were heading for collapse decades ago. I mean, that was why a lot of people were against Hugo Chavez. It was because they knew that it was going to destroy Venezuela, and Venezuela is destroyed. So freedom you can't predict. You can't make predictions about free societies, but you can make predictions about unfree ones, and you can't make predictions about what a free society will turn into when it becomes unfree. The reason why Ayn Rand's predictions in Atlas Shrugged about America were correct was not because she could see what the free parts of America were going to turn into. She couldn't have predicted that. She didn't even try. That's the point. She didn't try. What she could predict was what would happen when the parts of America become less free, whether economics or in politics or in culture or education, because it's the same thing that happens every time. Tyranny is predictable. Freedom is not.
She got the fracking thing right, but Reardon Metal hasn't come true yet.
No, we're still waiting for that. Yeah. Well, anyway,
there's technology that reignites old wells or allows blah, blah, blah. Anyway. Fracking is like that come true.
Yeah,
that's what brilliant thing about Atlas Shrugged. It's a little bit of science fiction. It's a little bit of philosophy. It's a little bit of love novel. It's a little bit of naturalistic. It's pretty good. A little bit of crime novel, epic. But, okay. Gary Johnson, did we cover him sufficiently?
Well, I mean, you could go on about libertarianism to the cows come home. I mean, one of the problems with Gary Johnson, because we were just dealing with the foreign policy. That's always been the problem with libertarian foreign policy. One size fits all, very myopic. The problem is that libertarianism doesn't have an underlying philosophy, which means that it's difficult for people to see what's wrong with stuff Gary Johnson says. Paul Joseph Watson, talking of InfoWars, because it always comes back down to that, Paul Joseph Watson of InfoWars, he's the sane one of the group. He basically did this video called Gary Johnson is an Idiot. It was so popular that Gary Johnson has recently reversed his position on a few positions as a result of the video. At least he reversed his positions publicly immediately after the video came out and became very popular. And Paul Joseph Watson basically lists all the stupid stuff Gary Johnson says. You know, he's for all sorts of, he's for carbon tax. Right. A carbon tax. My God, a carbon tax. The most unlibertarian thing I could think of.
Well, he's a either a Democrat or a Republican. I've heard him be accused of both. And he's on the libertarian thing because of shenanigans, because politics makes strange bedfellows.
Well, we've got three parties now. All three of them have screwed up. People are saying that the Libertarian is a good third alternative because the Democrats and the Republicans have fielded the worst candidates they've ever fielded. Hillary Clinton is the worst DNC candidate ever. Not necessarily the worst president. Obama's the worst president Democrats have ever given America. But in terms of the and George W. Bush was one of the worst that Republicans have ever fielded. And so that we've had terrible presidents, we've had terrible presidential candidates. And this year, the Republicans who could have had Carly Fiorina, they could have had Ted Cruz, they could have had Rand Paul. Any one of those people would have been good presidents.
We had 7, that's so American to have 7 men up on the stage. And the public chose.
Yeah, and they chose the worst one. And so you've got Ted Cruz.
That's what you say. Come on, you've got to give the public credit. No,
it's not the public as a whole, because Trump's got the worst disfavorables, the worst negatives of any candidate ever. The second is Hillary Clinton.
18 other people he had to beat out for his position. How many?
Yeah, I mean, I agree that he won. I agree that he won. He beat them, absolutely. He had greater merit as a candidate than the others in terms of skill, not necessarily in terms of values, though.
He didn't beat out the best 5 that the Republicans could throw at him. He beat out the best 12 that the Republicans could throw.
Yes, I agree that he showed he was the final gladiator standing in the middle of the ring surrounded by broken bodies. I agree with that. Whereas Hillary Clinton was just appointed. Yeah, we all know that. The DNC just appointed her. I mean, it was obvious even before the WikiLeaks that that's what the DNC were doing. Really, really obvious. I mean, that's the one good thing about the corrupt Democrats. At least they're obvious about the corruption. But what was the alternative? The alternative to Hillary Clinton, the most corrupt presidential candidate there's ever been, worse than Nixon. I mean, Nixon had 18 minutes of tape removed. She's had 30,000 emails deleted. Yeah. She's had hammers smashing phones to bits, and spectacularly corrupt. And as I say, lying about her health to the public and all that kind of stuff. You know, and anybody that says anything about her health is an Alex Jones tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist. Yeah, I guess we're all wearing tinfoil hats now. So there you go. And so you got the most corrupt president there's ever been, and the most belligerent and divisive and toxic presidential candidate in Trump. And then if you look at the libertarians, they screwed up too. They could have had Austin Peterson. Austin Peterson is a real libertarian. He was a damn fine guy. I was following his campaign from the very beginning. This guy had nothing. He had no money. He had no support. He was nothing at all. And then you have McCaffrey, who's a hilarious character in his own right. So at least you had the most colorful candidate libertarians have ever had, and you had the most consistent and honest. Austin Peterson, damn fine candidate. Gary Johnson? They went with him because he was the most compromised candidate. Yeah. When they say he's a compromised candidate, they mean he's a compromised candidate. And so he's the least libertarian of all the candidates. He's the least consistent. He's the least principled. He's a moron. He's all over the place. He's the worst presidential candidate libertarians have ever put forward. So in all 3 parties in 1 year have all put forward the worst candidate out of all those they could have selected. Because even Sanders would have been better than Hillary Clinton.
Now look, because Trump's a different story than the other 2. He was not selected. He won.
Yes, I agree. There's more of a survival of the fittest philosophy in the Republican Party, to their credit. They do deserve that. He's the only one that, because I mean, the selection for Gary Johnson was suspect as hell. Austin Peterson was not treated fairly at all. The Libertarian Party is a disgrace because they aren't the fanatical, because the whole point is we've been criticizing them for being too principled and myopic, and they're having a very narrow worldview. The problem is that they're clearly not narrow enough in terms of the establishment of the libertarians, because they chose the least principled candidate, but he's still too myopic, even at least in foreign policy, and it's sloppy and it's easy. Foreign policy is harder than domestic policy because you're dealing with more countries than you are with domestic policy, that by definition. And so the foreign policy side is the side that libertarians tend to be the laziest on. They tend to be and so him being an ignorant moron who doesn't even know what Aleppo is, even though it's such a crucial part of what's going on with ISIS, that doesn't surprise me. All libertarians are like that pretty much. There are some hawk libertarians, but they're so rare. I very rarely meet them. And I mean, even like Pentelet isn't a hawkish libertarian, but someone like Stefan Molyneux is more like that because he's a European, and so he understands that like open borders is cultural suicide. He understands that sometimes you do actually have to put bad rogue nations in their place, but he's a rare thing. I mean, most of them, they're very lazy, very sloppy, very, again, like the left. That's the problem. The problem with libertarians is that there's crossover between them and the left. They've absorbed bad habits of thought from the left. And they need to smarten up. They need to get their crap together. They need to stop mimicking post-colonial crap. They need to learn about what's going on in the rest of the world. And they need to stop putting up half-assed idiots like Gary Johnson, who talks a good game, in terms of his presentations. Have you seen his candidacy videos? He's very good at selecting the parts of his policies that are libertarian, but he ignores all the stuff that he says that isn't libertarian. The whole sort of Jews should make wedding cakes for Nazis sort of thing. Yeah, that's not libertarianism. Yeah. And he doesn't really get it. He doesn't get it at all because he's too much of a compromised politician. He says what is likely to get. Because the problem is that a lot of libertarians share a lot of common values with liberals. Liberals are socially liberal and they're governmentally, fascistic, basically. Liberals and progressives are people who believe in social liberal values and government fascism, whereas libertarians are people who believe in social liberal values and government liberal values. So at least they're consistent. But the problem is they keep trying to sort of peel away and try to convince liberals to join their side, which is good, but the problem is that rather than convince the liberals that their governmental policies are vile and fascistic, they keep trying to convince their own side, the libertarian side, that they should compromise their values in order to attract liberals. That's the problem. Libertarians keep compromising to get the left over, and it should be the other way around. You should be persuading the other side to join your side.
Well, the libertarians there is some sort of growth, and they're getting more important, and people are noticing them more. Look at the fact that back when Ross Perot was messing around, there was the Republicans, the Democrats, and then you could be independent, right? And now there's actually the third party, a libertarian party. And this whole time, there's always been a third party, the Green Party. There's always been the Green Party since like 1972 or 77 or something like that. So what's hilarious is that the Green Party is not convincing to anybody in America anyways. I know it's taken over half of your governments in Europe. But, in America, we're just passing the green stuff right on by, not even interested, honey.
Because it's insufferable garbage. I mean, unfortunately, Europe has been completely bought into this whole environmental crap, which is why we have recycling rules up the wazoo. I mean, if you're in London, you have to put everything in these like 3 or 4 different kinds of bins, and you get fined if you don't get it right. I mean, it's just ridiculous. But that's environmentalists. They're all authoritarian. They're all micromanaging megalomaniac scum. I mean, the more you look into environmentalist ideology, the more I used to be a member of Greenpeace, and like one of the co-founders who's now a campaigner against Greenpeace, I have turned against it. I can't believe that they're just that insane, because
it sounds nice to have seals. Why can't we have some seals?
Because they're promoting their worldview like them asinine idiots. Yeah. I mean, they're not prioritizing human life, which is dangerous, and they've turned the environment into a platonic abstraction. It's an ideal that must be sacrificed for. You must sacrifice for the environment. And that's not how it works. The environment isn't some perfect benign thing. The environment was out to kill us throughout most of our existence. Before we started to develop central heating and housing, the environment was out to kill us every single day. And so the idea that we're suddenly going to turn around and say we must sacrifice for the thing that tried to kill us during most of our existence is asinine. No, we take the environment, we shape it to us. You either master the environment or you let it master you. And if you look at all these parts of the world where people are at the victim of environment, or the victim of climate, or the victim of changes in weather, these people are in need of all the very things that the environmentalists hate. They need fossil fuels, they need industrialization, they need capitalism, and the environmentalists hate all of that. And so at the end of the day, the environmentalists are for the victimization of humanity at the hands of the environment. It's the environment versus man, not man sacrificing for the environment. They have a totally backward way of looking at the world. And it is, who is the loser here? Humanity is the loser, and the environment. Because at the end of the day, the more we can safeguard ourselves in the environment, the less that we need to take it on. If we can domesticate the environment, we don't need to destroy it.
Well, I read a thing about the Peace Corps sending people to Africa to help local villages and stuff.
Yeah.
And they go and they live there and they just help people in the neighborhood that need things with their Western knowledge. And they were teaching these guys how to take the cow manure and spread it around on the fields to make the crops grow better. They're teaching them this basic stuff. Instead of importing fertilizer or freeing up their economy so they could produce fertilizer there or something, they keep it a stagnant, controlled economy.
Yeah.
And they teach them these things that in the West we were using 200 years ago.
Yeah. Well, the problem is that
it's like a little zoo. We've got this little zoo of multicultural pygmies.
Yes.
You get to go and visit, and we say, "Oh, look how cute! They don't use tractors."
All these people who these bleeding hearts who go on about the developing world, the starving Africans, and all that. They're the biggest racists around. I mean, they perpetuate this narrative of Africans as victims and starving. The idea that they can't help themselves. I mean, some of them, to their credit, have actually begun to realize this is the wrong approach. This is creating a dependency mindset. That you're not helping these people by endlessly funneling other people's money into their mouths. They need to stand up on their own 2 feet. And so some of them, like Bob Geldof, have started to open up like for-profit trade deals with the developing world. For-profit on his end. That's the point here. That's how it must be. We must open up trade deals with. We need to treat them like they're sort of undeveloped parts of Europe. How did when the Industrial Revolution took up? What exactly happened here? We opened up trade. We encouraged industrialization with other parts of Europe, and so Europe basically, because the industrialized revolution took place in Britain, and then we basically exported it to continental Europe. And they took a lot of our ideas. You know, we didn't just need to impose industrialization on them. They saw our quality of life shoot up, and they wanted a piece of that themselves.
Well, the left doesn't want to industrialize these countries, and that's the option. There's no other way for them to become. So they're going to remain poor and stagnant unless they industrialize.
Yeah, I mean, these middle-class liberal snobs, they live in their cushy suburbs with their solar panels, and they think that the Africans can do that as well. But that cushy suburb and that solar panel was built upon over a century of hard grinding industrial development. And they don't appreciate that at all. They don't appreciate this stuff doesn't come from nowhere. You can't just go from starving African to suburban, and they think that that's the quality of life that you should be able to get to immediately. They think that that's the norm. It isn't. And they don't appreciate how things, because again, they're temporally myopic. They don't acknowledge the past, and they don't acknowledge the future. They don't acknowledge the consequences of their own actions, either as they occur or as they are going to occur. They don't acknowledge.
And why would the past or the future have any bearing on their perfect ideas? Because their ideas aren't deduced from the past or the future, and
no. And that's why everybody on the left is ignorant of history. I am having to constantly school these idiots about history. Fact after fact after fact, and they don't care. They have their ideology, and it's the same with Marx. Marx wasn't a student of history. He cherry-picked. He developed his ideology, then he went back and he cherry-picked bits of history in order to fit his ideology. His research pattern was horrifically dishonest. And that's the same thing with the future. He didn't care about the future. He just imagined the future would unfold the way he wanted it to. And his projections were all completely wrong, which is why Marxism, basically, classical Marxism died, and why it's had to reinvent itself as cultural Marxism. But they're still going to be doing exactly the same things because it's just a cultural version of the same mistakes.
I think that they've left behind all the things that didn't work, and they've clung to religion, because religion answers all the problems that they've been having. Now they can just go forward with Islam as the basis of Marxism.
Well, I think that you're underestimating just how successful cultural Marxism has been. I mean, they're embracing, many of the left are embracing Islam, but in the same way they're embracing the poor in Africa as sort of pets, domesticated, people that need to be treasured and protected from those evil, nasty, mean racists, even though those evil, nasty, mean racists are actually the least racist people in society, and whose policies are the only hope that Africa has or the Middle East has. You know, that's the problem here. I don't think they're embracing Islam. I think that they're basically condescendingly patting it on the head.
Well, that's it. They're going to condescendingly pat it on the head until it takes over their society. So
yeah, well, this is why left-wing values are dying among the middle class, among the working class in Europe. More and more people in the working class are abandoning left-wing ideology, because left-wing ideology isn't about the working man anymore. It's not about the proletariat, and even then it was a con. But these days, leftism is about rich, bourgeois, middle-class twits with their ludicrous ideologies imposing everything on everybody else. They're the most arrogant, elitist, presumptuous pricks imaginable. And the poor know that. And the poor, meanwhile, in Europe, are getting screwed over because they're the ones living on the streets. They're the ones who have a street-level observation about the devastation of their communities. This is why a lot of members of Pegida, a lot of the anti-Islamic groups in Europe are working class, which makes it easier for the liberal middle class to smear them all as ignorant racists. Even though the whole difference between the middle class and the working class is that the working class live in the real world. And that's the point. The middle class live in gated communities, metaphorically or literally. They don't understand what's going on in the world any more than the ivory tower academics, who are the real puppet masters of the left. They don't understand what's going on. In the real world, the working class people are seeing their communities destroyed. They're seeing the police turn a blind eye to Islamic atrocities committed on the streets every day. And they see the Islamification of their societies, and they see that these Muslims are not the nice, moderate Muslims you see on TV.
Do you know that the mosque that the Orlando shooter attended burned down yesterday?
Oh, what a pity. I'll send them some flowers. But yeah, because at the end of the day, yeah, I mean, these people, this is what's going to happen. If the government doesn't impose rule of law, the people are going to do it. And unfortunately, the people are not the best source of justice, because it's mobs, it's vigilantes. And so there is a right-wing vigilante culture that's starting to develop, because the left-wing do not believe in following rule of law. They don't believe in imposing rule of law equally. You know, they'll turn a blind eye when black people riot. They'll turn a blind eye when Muslims commit atrocities, because they believe that these people are persecuted and victims, and that everything they're doing is white people's fault. And so this self-loathing anti-white culture is actually hurting everybody. Black people do not benefit from an absence of rule of law at all. Nobody does, except Muslims, because they have their own legal system, and that's ultimately what it's about. This is legal system versus legal system. This is a clash of rule of law, in other words, Western civilization, versus Sharia, i.e. the most evil legal system that is ever developed. Sharia is the code of the barbarian, because if you actually read like jihad principles and treatment of women, it's what a barbarian would do. Treat women like subhumans, treat non-Muslims like captured slaves, dhimmis, and basically act like you have the right to push everybody else around, because you're the biggest, you know, your scimitar is bigger than their scimitar, basically.
It would be better to go back to the law code of ancient Rome, which had, you know, crucifixion for certain things and stuff. That would be less barbaric than the Muslims, which is odd. Well, Muslims came up with theirs hundreds of years after the Romans. They ought to have a more civilized code, but they don't.
No, because they didn't, because they didn't need it. They were, because the Romans developed their legal code after they got through a lot of their barbaric stuff. The Roman Empire was very stable for a long period of time. They weren't invading and conquering people every 2 seconds. They were actually very much a sort of conciliatory, control the population we've already got, and that's that. And so they weren't about barbaric, brutal conquest all the time. They were in their early stages. They were very barbaric. They were looked down on as barbarians by the Greeks, after all. But then they became almost as advanced as the Greeks themselves, although they obviously never achieved the same heights as ancient Athens.
By copying the Greeks, they came.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's the best you could do. Let's face it, that's the best thing that you could possibly do, is just Xerox ancient Athens.
That's all anyone can still.
Yeah. That's what the Renaissance was like. That's what it was called, the Renaissance. It was the return to Greco-Roman values. But the problem with the Islamic world is that their values were baked into the core tenets of their religion at a stage when they were still at that tentative early stage of military conquest and expansion. If Roman law had been based on their earliest years of military expansion, the Roman legal system would have been as evil and barbaric as Sharia law. And so it's not that all these cultures are intrinsically superior or inferior. It all depends on what stage in their development they are and what stage becomes trapped in amber, so to speak. At what stage of Christianity, if you look at Christianity, this is I dealt with this before. Christianity is an infinitely more moral and civilized religion than Islam, because its doctrines and scripture were developed and set in stone in the New Testament before it gained military and political and legal power. And so there's no rigid, explicit legal, political, and military policies within Christianity, allowing for tremendous variety and experiment. And remember, freedom and experiment is what causes progress. So Christian civilization has been able to progress because it doesn't have a rigid approach to law and government and military. Whereas Islam the Quran was finished long after they developed a long history of military conquest, of expansionism, of rape and pillage, and jihad atrocities, and brutal authoritarian theocratic caliphates which just massacre their own populations constantly, etc., etc., and of course the legal system of Sharia. And so Islam could never escape that. It can never escape its earliest, most brutal 7th century barbaric roots, because those principles are baked into its core tenets. Whereas with so the problem is that when you're dealing with different ideologies that are stalled at different stages of development, it's not that they couldn't have developed, it's not that they didn't develop, and it's not that different cultures, it's not that Rome wasn't once as barbaric as Islam, it's just that one was free to evolve and the other isn't. It's as simple as that. There is an artificial restraint keeping various cultures in this world from developing, unfortunately. And it's only when you get rid of those restraints, and the only way to get rid of those restraints within Islam is to get rid of Islam altogether. That's the only way. End Islam, period. It's the only chance you have. You can't rehabilitate this religion. It's
we might have to wait for it to collapse the way we did with Soviet Russia.
Yes.
Because
this is why, ironically, bashing Gary Johnson and non-interventionist libertarians, the irony is that that's my approach to the Middle East. I think we should get the hell out. Other than supporting Israel, which I think is a moral imperative, because Western civilization owes it to them not to have a second Holocaust, I think. I think we owe it to the Jews. The Jews helped build Western civilization. Then we let 6 million of them die. And I think we owe it to Israel to prevent another Holocaust. And if Israel was not able to defend itself, there would be a second Holocaust. They would have been one in the 70s, because the surrounding Muslim countries tried to wipe out Israel 3 times. And that's what would have happened there. There would have been a second Holocaust. We've already faced the possibility of second Holocausts multiple times from the surrounding Muslim countries. So defending Israel is a priority. But apart from that, screw the rest of the Middle East. Let those bastards rot in the hell that they've created. And then eventually they will learn. They will see our prosperity and they won't envy it anymore, because they will realize that we didn't create this prosperity by exploiting other people. That's post-colonial crap. That's zero-sum economics. That's not how economics works. Japan wasn't prosperous after the Second World War because it colonized and exploited other countries. Their colony was taken away from them. Their empire in China was taken away from them, and they were nuked. They started with nothing. The reason they were able to prosper after the Second World War is because they had rule of law, they had constitutionally limited government, and they had capitalistic economic freedom. That's all it takes. And if you don't have those things, you deserve what you get, because you've seen what it takes to prosper. Western civilization had to develop these principles from scratch. We had no example to work off. The rest of the world has our example. There is zero excuse. If you're in a backward, stagnant hellhole, it's because of your government, or it's because of you not holding the government to a higher standard. And so there's no reason to feel guilty about the stagnation and poverty in the rest of the world. They know what to do. If Shanghai could go from a fishing village in to a skyscraper in a strewn city, and same with Hong Kong, with no natural resources, they didn't have slaves, they didn't have colonies, they just had rule of law, limited government, and economic freedom, and that's all it took. Through sheer trade power, they were able to develop that way. That's all it takes. Every single African village can be another Hong Kong, like that. All it takes is the same basic set of principles, and
Right.
they don't do it. They don't do it because their leaders are evil and corrupt and stupid and ignorant. And let's face it, a significant percentage of the population are as well, or they'd have overthrown those motherfuckers.
All right. Now, we've been going for about an hour, so I'm going to post join things about the place, and then we'll spend about an hour doing Q&A and continuing on. We didn't even talk about the 9/11 thing yesterday, 9/11 anniversary, or Syria or Putin. So I'm going to go ahead and post things around.
Yeah.
Join in the... Oh, we've got live chat, by the way. So we can go look at that as it's going on now. He says that the Jews should go to Utah, similar environment, no Muslims.
Well, at the end of the day, that might work, except for the fact that that would be such a huge displacement of population that it would cause huge problems in itself.
Nah, we got room in Utah.
Really? I don't know. I mean, I keep forgetting how big America is. No, seriously, everybody in my country, we cannot mentally grasp how big America is. It's beyond our comprehension.
No, we have room in Utah. We could probably put another 15 or 20 million people there without even...
The problem is that I think the Jews are entitled to Israel. And besides which, when you have a civilized society in the Middle East, it benefits the West because we actually have, we have trade advantages and knowledge and things like that. When the Crusades created the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the most advanced, legally and politically, the most advanced nation in the world at that time was the Kingdom of Jerusalem, was the Crusader Kingdom. We had trade, we had culture, we had intellectual, because we had trade with the Orient. We had access because the Western world for centuries had been based around the Mediterranean, not Western Europe, but the Mediterranean. And we had, because of our territory in the Middle East, we had access to the Orient, and we had huge trade deals and things like that. We didn't get that. That was cut off from us when the Muslims stole the Middle East, when they stole Syria and Egypt and they stole Palestine. They basically cut us off from the Orient, and they cut us off from a significant percentage of the culture and language and ideas that we developed there. Because Syria was once an intellectual hub, huge, powerful intellectual hub in the Roman world. This is why a lot of these great thinkers, if you read Roman history, are from Syria, and you think, why are they all from Syria? Well, because Syria was massively important, and then it got taken over and became a backward hellhole. And so when the Crusades opened up the Middle East, they opened up a huge world to us that we'd lost for such a long period of time. And it was true that some Muslims preserved some of the knowledge, but only because they were in a position to do so because they'd stolen it from us. They preserved the writings of Aristotle, after they stole it from the Byzantines. And so having an example of civilization in the Middle East is a powerful thing. The problem is that the Muslims don't look at Israel as a country to be emulated. They see it as a country to envy. And this is the same mindset the left has. Instead of looking at progress, instead of looking at success and achievement as something to be emulated, instead of looking at the success of the West and thinking, well, that's great, they've managed to achieve such a great flourishing civilization, the greatest culture has ever existed. What do they do to achieve that, and how can we copy that? That's what Japan did, and look where it's got them. Incredibly prosperous compared to most of the Far East.
Yeah,
whereas,
the attitude
and India's starting to do that as well. But the Middle East looks at Israel and they think, how can we kill all those Jew motherfuckers? That's how they see it. The level of anti-Semitism in the Muslim world is astounding. They look at success and they hate it and they envy it. And it's the same thing with the left. They look at success and their post-colonial narrative says that this must have been achieved by stealing from some other group.
Yeah, they don't want to have the nice things though. They don't even want to steal them and have them. Like they think that we stole them. They don't want to go steal them and have them. They want to destroy nice things. They don't want anyone to have nice things.
Yeah, because they want equality. And the only way to create equality is to drag everybody else down to the lowest possible level.
Yeah. Now, Islam isn't into equality. That's going to come to a head because Marxism is all about equality, and Islam doesn't care about equality.
Yes, I mean, Sharia law is an apartheid legal system that says that male Muslims have more rights than anybody else, followed by female Muslims and then non-Muslims.
Right, and then that's not equality at all, but within that there are males that are higher than other males. There are the imams and stuff. And
yes, everything, very, very, very rigid hierarchy. And we don't have equality either in any total sense. We do have hierarchies too. They are practical, but the problem is that they're based on merit, or at least they're supposed to be. You know, experience, qualifications. It's okay to outrank someone else in the military as long as you actually, you know, it's part of the chain of command, it's part of the meritocracy. Whereas when you have a system that's based on presumptions of inherent superiority, there's never any chance of equality there. And the problem is that the left think that they're up against systems of inherent inequality in the West, while turning a blind eye to the systems of inherent inequality in the Muslim world, because they are all about destroying the Western world.
Yeah,
that's why the left. That's why the left and the Islamic world get along so well. Well, they think they do. The left think that they've been chummy with the Muslims, and the Muslims just look at them and think, "Wow, these guys are so stupid. We're going to exploit them completely." This is what the Holy Land Foundation trial memos revealed. It turns out that a lot of these Muslims see liberals and progressives and leftists as a bunch of saps who can be exploited. They can use political correctness to manipulate these morons and to do their bidding. And that's exactly what's going on. The left are just the useful tools of these Islamists, who all they have to do is say they're moderate. They don't have to be moderate. How many times has a so-called moderate Muslim that's propped up as a prop by the left turned out to have serious Sharia ties? Happens over and over again. Abedin is a good example of this. She's got horrifically horrible things in her past. I mean, she was the editor of a magazine that promoted the most horrifically misogynistic stuff in line with Sharia law. And nobody gives a crap in the left. Nobody gives a crap. They've got their token Muslim, and that's all that counts.
And what's hilarious, you guys just put Anjem Chowdhury away.
Yep. He didn't get enough.
Could possibly have led to the deaths, or might in the future still lead to the deaths of many, many, many people, hundreds of people, thousands maybe.
I actually regret that he's in prison because...
For 5 years? That's it?
Yes. Yeah.
That's it?
Because, I mean, I'm surprised he even got that much. Because, because the thing is, the reason why he got into prison is because the left withdrew their barrier of protection from him. Because normally, the left will protect any Muslim, no matter how evil they are, if they just play the moderate on TV. Adam Chowdhury refused to play along. He refused to utilize al-taqiyya. I don't know why he refuses to use that, because it's within his rights as a Muslim to lie to non-Muslims all he likes. But he goes on TV and he freely admits, yeah, we want to take over the world. We think you're all inferior to us. We want Sharia law to dominate the world. And everybody else is, and the left are going, shut up, don't tell them. And of course, the open quotes moderate, close quotes Muslims are all saying the same thing to him. He lets the cat out of the bag. And so the left refused to protect him anymore. They protected him for years because, of course, he's Muslim. He's brown. He's got a stupid beard. He's foreign and exotic, and therefore is a victim, and therefore is the victim of evil white supremacist oppression. Even though he is the British Osama bin Laden, he is still a victim. He's still someone that must be defended no matter what. But they can only defend that crap so much because, you know, at the end of the day, he refuses to play along. That's the deal. All these scumbags, all these evil pieces of shit, these mass murdering, terrorist, anti-Semitic, psychopathically racist and sexist Muslim scumbags, all they have to do is go on TV every now and again and pretend to be moderate. That's all they have to do. That's the deal. And they can be as racist and as evil as they like in their private lives, which is what's happened with all these leaders of CARE. It's what happened to the Imam spokesman for the Ground Zero Mosque. You know, all these people, they just want them to be moderate just enough so that they don't care whether or not they're really evil or not. And Chowdhury refused to play the ball. And I kind of admire that about him because he refused to be even worse. Because in many respects, the moderate Muslims are worse than the fundamentalists because they're all fundamental. They're all evil scumbags. That's the point. Hashtag all Muslims. Sorry, but there you go. If you follow Islam to any degree, you are responsible for the evils of this ideology. And all Muslims know that there is evil within a religion. It's impossible to avoid. And he refused to be these two-faced, moderate taqiyya practitioners. He wanted to be a true to his principles and openly proclaim them. And yes, he was evil, but they all are. And at least I can admire that, and that he didn't hide what he was, unlike all the other Muslims that you see on TV. All these taqiyya, like Khan, for example. Trump got in trouble for criticizing Khan because he said, well, his wife doesn't say anything probably because she's not allowed. She probably isn't. I mean, we are dealing with a guy who promotes Sharia law, so why would she speak?
Yeah,
and so Trump was probably right by sheer accident, because it's Trump. But yeah, he was probably right. And
now look, Trump knows what it means to have a guy sitting around doing nothing. He knows what unproductive workers are, and he's going to shut down a lot of federal stuff just out of pure principle.
Yeah, I mean, it annoys me to side with Trump on the whole Khan thing, but at the end of the day, this Khan guy actively pursues the Islamification of Europe, of America. That's what he is. He wants to. He tries to import as many Muslims as possible. He supports Sharia law. He is an enemy to America. And just because his kid died for America a few decades ago doesn't change that. I don't judge this guy by what his son does. I judge him by what he does, because I'm not a racist. I'm not an Islamophile racist idiot that holds Muslims to no moral standards whatsoever. I actually care about who this guy is, and he is corrupt and evil as hell. Why do you think he was at the DNC attacking Trump? He is a willing tool of the DNC, and they are his willing tool. It's a marriage of convenience. It's a devil's pact between the Islamic corruptors and destroyers of Western civilization and the left-wing corruptors and destroyers of Western civilization. And Trump was quite right to go after him. But unfortunately, again, being Trump, he went after him like a dumbass.
Well, that guy's disrespecting his son's life. The purpose of his death was right, protecting America or something, fighting in the
I mean, American soldiers protect the lives of the American people and the Constitution. They're defending the Constitution. And Sharia law is the total, despite what Alan Combs might say on Fox News, Sharia law is the total opposite of the Constitution. And so, and as Khan is a champion of the Sharia law, he is an enemy of the Constitution. He's an enemy of America. And Trump was quite right to call him out, but Trump called him out like a dumbass, and so that creates a lot of sort of ammunition for the left to attack him, unfortunately. If Trump had like 10, 20 more IQ points, he'd be amazing. He would be, well, he'd be me. Well, okay, no, if he had 100 more IQ points, he'd be me. But it would be great.
He's going to be fine. He got the skating rink in Wellman Park built. He's going to be a good president. Don't worry about it.
Oh, okay. Skating rink equals entire country. Gotcha. Yeah, the logic of the objectivists, shining like a beacon in the night.
The objectivists are they've always been like, the libertarians are terrible, the libertarians are unprincipled, don't vote libertarian, they're unprincipled. Now, because Trump's there, they're all like, Gary Johnson's great, vote libertarian, Gary Johnson this, Gary Johnson that.
Yeah, and it's not, I mean, there was an article in the Objective Standard, and weighing Gary Johnson for president by Craig Biddle, and it's a fantastic article because it basically points out that this guy doesn't have we are compromising our principles. We have to. The only reason to vote for him really is for tactical reasons, because you're trying to avoid a worst case scenario. But the article also mentions the American Capitalist Party. Now that's more like it. Now that's the American Capitalist Party has a nice platform. But unfortunately, every single person listening to this right now has only heard of the American Capitalist Party right now, because nobody's heard of them other than very few people. No, exactly. I mean, it's terrible because they've got the word capitalist in the title. That alone is going to hamstring them.
Yeah, that's not going to work out well.
Because capitalism, at the end of the day, we have to promote capitalism. We have to say, look, capitalism is the morally superior choice because it's produced more prosperity than anything else, and it does so without brainwashing, without centralization, without tyranny, without fascist, socialist, Marxist, communist, Maoist, Stalinist regimes. You've got 1,000 flavors of evil, and they're all directly as a result of the fight against capitalism. All anti-capitalists have created is poverty, misery, and tyranny. And we have to make that case. You're either a proud capitalist or you're the victim of socialists and Marxists.
Right now, it's defined as a package deal where capitalist means oppression and some big
Yeah.
guy borrowing out money but not producing anything. We need to redefine it by essentials. The real essential of capitalism is freedom. So we just need to put it to people.
Yeah.
You
Well,
want
it is a package deal. It is a package deal because it also includes rule of law, limited government, constitution, because you can't have limited government without constitution. And the whole reason to have government is to have rule of law. And so capitalism equals rule of law, equals limited government, equals constitution. One thing depends upon another, depends upon another. So it is a package deal, but it's a damn good one. And the Milton Friedman was once confronted by some self-righteous Marxist idiot who wanted to smear capitalism by saying, look at all these evil, like fascist countries, like Pinochet and all that. Look at all these countries that practice capitalism but are really fascist. Isn't that like evidence of the evil of capitalism? And of course it isn't. But as Milton Friedman points out, capitalism is a necessary component of liberty and a just society, not a sufficient one. You need capitalism, but you also need rule of law. And you also need, because even capitalism in itself, even without a decent government, still requires a lot more decency on the part of the government, even if they're a dictatorship, than they ordinarily would have. If these capitalist dictatorships were communist dictatorships, they'd be 1,000 times worse. But just by having capitalism, people have more, by necessity, more freedom and rule of law than they'd ordinarily have. Capitalism has made bad dictators slightly less bad, and it's the only component that's any good in these societies. And if they had proper rule of law, and if they had limited government and constitutional government, they'd be even better. And I guess elections too. But elections are always the least important part of any decent society, which is why the Constitution of America is based on the British Constitution, which was developed over an 800-year period, most of which was not when we were democratic. The real backbone of liberty is the Constitution, and the Constitution doesn't depend upon democracy, because it was developed most of the time when we had a monarchy, and it was largely developed in response to a monarchy. If it had been developed during times of democracy, it wouldn't have been anywhere near as good. Why? Because people wouldn't have felt the need to constrain the majority vote as much as a single ruler, because it's not as self-evidently wrong when a majority votes for something.
Yeah.
This is how the left are Athenian Democrats. They're democratic fascists. They believe that might makes right. In a sense, they believe majority makes right.
Yeah.
And it's harder to argue against that in a single ruler.
The democracy fetish is going to have to come to an end at some point, and they don't have anything to question it with, because the rule of the majority is put up on a pedestal now for a long time, since World War I, when Woodrow Wilson said, "Make the world safe for democracy."
Yeah.
So it's been on a pedestal a long time. They have no way to question it. It takes individual rights to question democracy. You have to say Socrates' life was more important than the 51% who voted to kill him or whatever.
Yeah, that's where it all begins. The death of Socrates is the most important event in human history, because it basically demonstrated, because all of history demonstrates what's wrong with a tyrant, a single ruler. But the death of Socrates demonstrated what's also wrong with democracy and a majority rule. And so we don't have majority rule is as evil as democracy, because in both cases is evil as tyranny, because in both cases the individual is crushed and destroyed. It doesn't, whether or not it was a king or a majority vote, Socrates is in both cases equally dead. And so Socrates is a metaphor for every single individual in existence. We are all Socrates. We are all made one flesh with the death of Socrates. Oh yeah, I mean, don't tell me Christianity wasn't borrowing from Greco-Roman philosophical martyrs.
Christianity is just Platonism warmed over.
Well, not all of it. I mean, that's the interesting thing about Christianity. At times, it embraces Aristotelian principles. I mean, there were a lot of Christians among the founding fathers, well, loosely Christian, and they were Aristotelian Christians. Yeah, which is why they were so good and wise. So again, this is why I like cutting Christianity some slack, because at times Christianity is almost there. They've almost got to a principled position of Aristotelian enlightenment. But unfortunately, they're held back by the fact that their metaphysics is Platonic.
I've got a guy in the comments here saying that David Kelly was ostracized for reasons X, Y, and Z. I'm pointing out Fact and Value by Peikoff in response to that. Maybe we should discuss that essay someday, because people are still confused about David Kelly and what happened there.
Yeah. I mean, it's in order, you basically have to maintain consistency. When you're dealing with a new philosophy, you have to be very strict about fundamentals. Otherwise, the whole thing falls apart. And unfortunately, that has resulted in sort of excommunication, if you want to use a dramatic term. But at the end of the day, and I have no objection to like David Kelly's work and like open objectivism, because it's more variety, it's more choice, and we shall see which approach lasts and which approach works best. Closed objectivism or open objectivism. Closed objectivism is going to work because it's more internally consistent. So, and at the end of the day, an internally consistent worldview always has the intellectual advantage. This is why radical jihadis have a huge propaganda advantage over the moderates. Moderates are losing the debate, and it's only when they have the only argument for moderate Islam is a pragmatist argument. We will get more support and wealth from the West. That's literally all the moderates have got going for them, because their worldview is pathetically inconsistent and incoherent. The fundamentalist Muslims, even though the fundamentalists can only promise you poverty and death, they still win because their argument is more consistent. And Muslims are smart and they know consistency from incoherency. And so it's actually the more intelligent people, because people keep saying, oh, well, the people who become radical Muslims are the uneducated. Bullshit. It's the exact opposite way around. People who become radicals are educated. They are, or at the very least, they're logically coherent and rational within Islamic constraint. Because if you're purely within a Muslim worldview, obviously a more rational worldview would be to dump Islam altogether. But if you're limiting yourself to within a Muslim worldview, the radicals are a lot more consistent and coherent than the moderates, because their worldview is intrinsically based around violent, evil principles. And so the radicals, being evil and violent, are therefore more consistent to the core tenets of Islam than the moderates, who are just kidding themselves. And that's why they win. That's why the radicals are able to convert people from nice, peaceful, middle-class, compromised, moderate families. And the families just go, we don't know how this happened. Well, it happened because you were hypocrites, and kids love to rebel against parents. And if you give them an excuse to rebel, they rebel. And what the radicals do is they go to these kids and they say, your parents are hypocrites because they're violating this Quran principle, this example of Muhammad, this, and this. And they are. And so, you know, the radicals are within the if the only worldview that's true is Islam, then the radicals are true. They are correct.
Yeah.
They are right. The only problem with radical Islam is that Islam isn't true.
The people who are against the radicals are against the will of Allah, ostensibly. I mean,
Yeah,
if the radicals
they're against the logic
Quran
of the
saying,
religion.
look, here the Quran says we need to do X, Y, and Z, then the moderate Muslims stand up and say, no, we don't need to do that. They're not only hypocrites, and they not only look spineless, they look like they're going against the word of God. So
Yeah, because they don't have any good reasons why you don't follow it.
yeah,
They
exactly.
just say, oh, it's metaphor, it only applied back then. The saying that the militant, because in the Quran it says, you know, hunt down and kill the infidels wherever you find them. Right. That's a pretty carte blanche statement. That's a statement of military expansionism. It's a military policy, because the entire 8th surah of the Quran is all about military policy. And it's straightforward, and there's no context that annuls that. And so when they say stuff like, oh, well, that only applied back then, that is immediately debunked simply by showing that all the Muslims that followed that rule at the time continued to behave that way after Muhammad died, and during Abu Bakr's reign, and after him, and the second caliph, third caliph, and fourth caliph, fifth caliph. There was a consistent pattern of military expansionism and bloodshed all the way for centuries. You're telling me that it only applied then, and yet they consistently applied that rule for over a millennium? That doesn't make any sense. You're denying most of Islamic history, and there was an unbroken chain of military expansionism and conquest. After all, how else did the entire Middle East and North Africa and Spain get conquered, and parts of France and Sicily get conquered by the 7th century? Within a century of Muhammad's death, they conquered their way across 3 continents.
Well, I'm
continents.
forward to their new marriage with Marxism going sour, because eventually Marxism is going to create rifts, because there's the rich and there's the poor within Islam, and then there's men and there's women within Islam, and then there's different sects within Islam, and equality is not going to fit well with that. That's going to cause
but the thing is, they haven't pointed that Marxists and smug, self-righteous liberals and progressives haven't noticed the massive inequality in Muslim society by now. They never will. I mean, at the end of the day, it's because they're relativists. They believe in holding Western civilization to a standard of equality that is impossible, and if you attempt to implement it, it'll destroy society. It's Khmer Rouge all over again. Khmer Rouge tried to impose a standard of equality, total equality, like educational equality, economic equality. Everything was equal, and they ended up killing millions of their own people because that's what happens when you try to impose an impossible standard on the population. But that's the West. That's what happens when the Marxists impose it upon their own people, or the East in the case of Khmer Rouge. But when it comes to Islam, they're another culture. Don't you understand? All cultures are equal. So you got one dogma butting heads with another dogma. On the one hand, equality is always good, which of course it isn't. And on the other hand, cultures are all equal. So that means that cultures that practice equality are equal to cultures that don't. Their entire worldview is completely self-negating. There's no logical consistency. But Marxists and leftists as a whole don't have to be logically consistent, because reason and logic are evil, patriarchal, sexist, racist, Western lies, because again, they're post-colonialists, they're postmodernists. They've rejected reason. This is Kantian and Platonistic. So they don't have to be coherent. So with Marxism, anything goes, basically. We're dealing with nihilists, ultimately.
We are. I think we're fighting the people who have been educated in the West and have gone back to the Muslim countries and have caused these revolutions and stuff. So ultimately, I don't think we're fighting Islam itself. I think we're fighting Marxism, and I think Islam is a competent religion.
No, I think they're using Marxist tools. They're using post-colonial narratives to justify the hatred of Israel, to justify hatred of the West. But they're ultimately using the tools to fuel, to defend, to justify an Islamic agenda. So I think that you're not giving the Muslims enough credit. They're smart. They're strategic. The long-term planning. After all, civilizational jihad that uses Marxism, and as I say, as the Holy Land Foundation trial memos revealed, they're using political correctness. They're using liberals and progressives. They're using Marxism. To them, Marxism is just another tool to use, like political correctness. It's just a tool to use to destroy the West. And so,
I don't know if they understand that they are
Marxist. Definitely. Because as I say, we've seen that from their writings. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the leader of ISIS, very smart guy, very educated. He knows his stuff. He's a Quranic scholar. Probably knows almost as much about the Quran as I do.
So he believes some tenets of Marxism.
Well, he believes in using those tenets of Marxism. He sees because again, he's not stupid. He could see that cultural Marxism is destroying the West. The feminists and Black Lives Matter and the progressives and the SJWs and the politically correct, all these authoritarians, all these fascists.
So they're going to use what? The guilt against white men?
Yes, they're using white guilt, they're using political correctness, they're using post-colonial narratives, but not only to fuel their own society, because post-colonial narratives just say that Western civilization is bad at everything and it's all evil and it's the cause of all the problems in the world, and they apply that because post-colonialism includes Israel. Israel is a colony, a Western colony, supposedly. So they're able to use post-colonialism as the framework for their propaganda against the West, and sort of reinforced by the jihad doctrine of Islam. So it's a horrible mixture of the two, but ultimately they'll dump all Marxist narratives in a second if it gets in the way of their Islamic agenda. Their primary goal is Islam. Make no mistake about it. What they're about is exactly what they say they're about. They're just using the most evil ideas of the West against the West. This is why Marxists and liberals and progressives are dangerous enemies of Western civilization, because their ideas not only are so bad and so toxic and dangerous to Western civilization and its progress and development, but also it could be used by our enemies against us as well as by the left themselves. And this is why Western civilization is in such dire straits.
I think that we've fought this before, though. I think we're still fighting the Germans. I mean, look, Islam sat there for a long time. We had to fight it in the Crusades and stuff, but it's ultimately incompetent and backward. So the fact that we imported all the money through the oil wealth because they seized our oil, and then add to that education of Marxism, that I think that's what we're fighting. We'll see. I admit that Islam's evil, but I think we're fighting German ideas more than we're fighting Islam.
Yeah, the German Enlightenment completely destroyed the well, Enlightenment period. I mean, Kant killed the Enlightenment. He ended it, period. And a lot of people don't realize this. A lot of people don't realize that all the virtues of Western civilization are derived from the Enlightenment, and all the evils are derived from what killed it. That's why Ayn Rand said that Kant was the most evil human being who ever lived. Other than Plato, she's entirely correct. And so we need to understand that these ideas, we're fighting our own inner demons. When we were fighting against the fascists and Nazis, we were fighting our own inner demons. We were fighting Plato and Kant with the Nazis and fascists. And same thing with feminism, same thing with SJWs. We're fighting our own inner demons. We've created our own monsters. And the Muslims are a different entity entirely. They're a different world, they're a different universe, they're a different set of values. But they're seeing what's going on in the West, and they're smart, and they're using these ideas. Because they've always done this way. They used, for example, after all, Islam stole from Judaism and Christianity to create itself in the first place. We know where Muhammad got his ideas from. He got them from heretical Christian and Jewish groups. That's why there's certain ideas in the Quran about concerning Old Testament events. I use the term events in a looser sense, that are like the original Bible passages but slightly different. It's because we know that when we study these heretical movements, we see those differences. So we knew that he was ripping off everybody from the beginning. He was a total plagiarist. And look, during the 9th and 10th and 12th centuries, Islamic culture flourished because they were stealing all the ideas of the Greco-Roman world. They were taking the numeral system from the Indians. They were taking geometry from Greece. They were taking all these different ideas, all these different philosophies from all these different sources. And they were exploiting and utilizing everything. They were smart. They were very, very smart. They're evil, but they're smart. And so they've always known what to take from the West. Always. I mean, a lot of the Quran, for example, takes Greek physiology principles. And that's why there's descriptions about the development of the embryo and things like that. And Muslims to this day use those passages to try to argue that there's science in the Quran. Of course, it isn't. There's ancient science, but it's not the same thing as modern science because they get it wrong. They just took over loads of ideas from the ancient Greeks. So that they know what to use. They have been using our better ideas to improve themselves and our worst ideas to cripple us all along. So we are dealing with two enemies here, an enemy from within and an enemy from without, which has always been the case with Western civilization.
And it's probably less of a threat than we faced from Soviet Russia or Nazi Germany. Probably. I don't know.
Well, no. You see, because the Soviets were atheists, and so they didn't want a nuclear war. The Soviets didn't want that, whereas many Muslims want a nuclear war. They don't see a problem with that because they want to go to heaven. True.
And Europe is sure going to get a whipping no matter which way, whether it's worse than Nazism or not. It's sure got a lot of violence already.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is a problem, as you demonstrated with the burning down of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. The problem is that the people fighting back right now are the street level thugs, and in some cases racists.
Mm-hmm.
The white supremacist racists are fighting back against Islam, and they are in turn smearing all the rest of them. The fight against Islam needs to be done in the name of civilization in a civilized way. And the problem is that a lot of people fighting against Islam are not doing it in the name of civilization or in a civilized way. They're doing it in the name of their children and families and streets that have been destroyed by this Islamic cancer. And that's the problem here. We're going to have to be on the same side as the very evil that the left keeps painting the right as a whole with, white supremacists, in a loose sense on their side. Very unpleasant. But it's the situation, that's the desperate situation. After all, we had to side with the Soviet Union to fight the Nazis.
Yeah.
And a lot of people originally, the irony is, a lot of people voted for the Nazis and supported the Nazis to get at the communists, to keep them from power. So Western history is, we're constantly able to side with the lesser two evils, and then have to fight the second greatest evil, which now is the greatest evil. So we're constantly fighting the greater evil, and we're lining up the next evil along the line.
Well,
that's the problem.
We produced the Mujahideen in order to get them to fight the communists in Afghanistan. We trained them and equipped them.
Yeah, which is like siding with because originally a lot of people sided with it wasn't just the German people that voted for Hitler. It was a lot of people in the West supported the Nazis because they saw them as a preferable alternative to the Bolsheviks. And so the Nazis got into power largely because they were seen as the lesser of two evils compared to the communists. And then we ended up siding with the communists because they were seen as the lesser of two evils compared to the Nazis. And so it was just a constant cycle of, no, we can't compromise at the end of the day. If the white supremacists happen to be fighting against the Islamists as well, as far as I'm concerned, it's an opportunity to bring them out into the light and crush them too, because they're just as bad as the Islamists. They're supremacists. That's the point. They are racial, because a lot of Muslims are racist as hell. They're not just, they're Arab supremacists or Turkish supremacists, because there's the Turkish and Arab Muslims hate each other a lot of the time, because they both have a long history of violence against each other. And so we're dealing with racial supremacists with Muslims. We're dealing with racial supremacists, white supremacists. We at least will know who our enemies are, and we just can't compromise at all. And the good thing about what Tommy Robinson is doing with the Pegida UK is that he's not compromising. Every single time they get any racists joining Pegida, the main grassroots group against Islamification of Europe, he crushes them. He throws them out. And so at least we've got a few people that get it. You do not compromise. Even if it swells your numbers, you do not side with these racist pieces of scum, because that'll just give more ammunition to the left.
Well, the left is getting to the point where people don't even care about the word racist or sexist anymore. They just don't care. If you call somebody racist in America now, they're just like, yeah, okay, so you're an idiot and you just lost the conversation.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I actually had an argument with as you know, I like to play some MMOs. And I was in a certain MMO where the guild leader turned out to be an SJW. This was like 3 days ago. As a result of this, I quit the guild. And he was basically calling me a racist because I'm for the wall that they're building in Calais. For very obvious reasons. Because A, we've got huge numbers of people that are illegally coming over the border. And B, they're setting fire to stuff. There's constant riots and violence and cars being hijacked and set on fire around Calais. It's an absolute disaster. We need the wall. It's a basic security thing. It's got nothing to do with racism. But he called me a racist, and I said to him, a lot of these people coming over the border and the people that have been flooding into Britain aren't even non-whites. A lot of them are actually Europeans from Eastern Europe that are coming over. And a lot of the people that are against the Islamification of the West are non-whites. Because there's lots of Hindus and Sikhs that don't want Islamification either, because Hindus and Sikhs have been victims of Islamic brutal terrorism for let's say about 500 years. Not as long as Europe. We took it full in the face the moment they appeared. But the fact is that there are lots of non-whites that oppose the Islamification or oppose illegal immigration. And he admitted that. He admitted that his accusation of racism has nothing to do with race explicitly. But he said to me, "Oh, you're using the old definition of racist."
Yeah.
And that's what they're doing. They have taken the word racist and they've used it to apply to anybody that disagrees with immigration policies. Yeah. Even though it has nothing to do with race. Because as I say, the bulk of the immigrants that have been coming over because of the open borders policies in the EU have been Poles or Lithuanians. They've been people who are white. And there's been the reason why people are complaining about Polish immigration in my country is because of economic reasons. You know, taking jobs and that kind of stuff. Whether or not that's true isn't the point. The point is that it wasn't racism. It was simply an economic problem.
Yeah,
but it's still called racist because they use the word racist for everything now. Because as I say, they use climate change is racist now. So the term just has lost all meaning, and it's a joke. And it is backfiring on them, but only slowly. There's still a lot of people who are idiots, people in the media, people online, who are still like trying to sort of, who still don't get that the game's up for the left. The left are a joke. You're a leftist. You're a joke. You're a moron. You use words that don't mean anything anymore, and you're just a bunch of bigots.
Time to discover. The establishment still believes in it, but the people don't anymore. The rabble don't, and eventually they're going to have to catch up with what the people in the street are doing, because the people in the street are actually acting. So. I mean,
because the problem is you've also got Hollywood celebrities who are the most backward, ignorant, oblivious morons imaginable. There's a video of the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. What do you call him? What do you call the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air?
Is Will Smith?
Will Smith. Yeah, he basically is in. I think it's Qatar or Dubai. Either way doesn't make any difference. And he's basically lecturing the West about Islamophobia. Yeah. And he's in a country where they still have black slaves. Yeah. So he's in a country with black slaves, lecturing the West about Islamophobia and saying, these are wonderful people, they treat you really well. Yeah, because you're Will Smith. If your name wasn't Will Smith, you'd be in chains right now, you stupid motherfucker. And that's the left in a nutshell. That's Hollywood in a nutshell. A bunch of stupid morons who don't understand anything about the real world. And the rest of us have already got, the rest of us already know that this whole Islamophobia thing is garbage. It's just because the left don't want to have Islam criticized. They want to shut down any criticism of it because they have backed themselves into a corner. They are on the side of an indefensible worldview that they can't defend. You can't defend Islam. its laws, its history, its doctrines are disgustingly evil. Muhammad's behavior, he commits every atrocity on the book. I haven't found a single human being in history that committed as many atrocities as he did, or as many different types. So they can't defend that, and they know it. So they just have to smear you. And it's a game. People are onto it. And the Hollywood types are still playing the same PC crap from a decade ago, and they just come off sounding idiots. But because unfortunately, a lot of millennials are falling for this because Hollywood celebrities are our gods now. You know, this is why the left are all about creating false gods. The left killed God and replaced it with a state, and so they use these demigods, these angels of Hollywood, in order to reinforce their religion. At this point, the DNC basically operates like the Catholic Church. They've got their doctrines, their catechisms, their papal bulls. They've got their hierarchies. They've got their Holy Trinity of Jefferson. So not Jefferson, Kennedy and Lyndon B. Johnson and Obama, and they've got their new anointed Messiah of Hillary, and they've got all their
replaced it with the state. When they killed God and replaced it with the state, they end up with a disaster. Yeah. And they had to take a break for a little while from that, but it looks like statism is coming back because now they need the state not to enforce socialism, but to enforce equality and women's rights, and
in other words, socialism,
to protect Muslims. In other words, socialism, but under a new game and a new name, and to protect the environment, to stop the environment from being raped. So it's,
I mean, these are all sort of narratives. These are all ideological, like meta structures, because that's what Marxist critique is all about. It's all about criticizing structures that may or may not even exist. But in the name of fighting in the name of fighting patriarchy, feminists have created a matriarchy. In the name of fighting racist oppression, BLM have created a racist organization. So they create the very things that they claim to fight against, and they invent a rape culture while actually creating a culture that basically inverts the rule of law, guilt into proven innocence. So
I don't know how much of the rape culture thing is real or not. Let's put that on the list to talk about next week. We're at our 2-hour line. They made it so that colleges have to deal with rape, sexual assault allegations themselves, and the colleges, of course, bury it and hide it because it's bad press. So,
or do they?
Yeah,
well, no, because it's a witch hunt. It becomes the rape accusations become a witch hunt because it's guilt into proven innocence.
That was step one and step two.
Yeah.
So then, because they're burying it and hiding it, the kids find out that they can do whatever they want and no one will ever do anything because it's bad press. The school won't press the charges and the school won't bury it.
Or an alternative is that the burials are, a lot of the burials are actually invented. They say that they're hiding it, but they're really just using that as an excuse to take over the faculty. Because a lot of the time, the accusations made by feminists and SJWs about institutional sexism or institutional racism is just a way of justifying the taking over that institution. They're always accusing institutions of racism and sexism that they have had a long-term agenda to take over. And so when they accuse the faculties of universities, what better thing does the leftist want than control over a faculty? You control the faculty, you control the students. You've got a whole new generation. They are brainwashing each generation at a time through faculties and through professors. This is why all these professors are all Marxists. And so they keep accusing faculties of sexism and racism so as to take them over. Because what are the list of demands? The list of demands is to replace certain white or male or whatever ones with less white or less male. Because at this point there is no, of course, male and female with them, is there? There's just less male, which is always best. And so by replacing the students, replacing the faculty with people that are supposedly on the basis of race and gender, what they're really doing is replacing them according to levels of ideological extremism. Because the people they're bringing in are always going to be more far to the left, always going to be progressive fascists. And so a lot of the time these accusations are really just takeovers, so just power plays. But yes, having the whole thing being handled by the university itself is just asking for trouble. Yes, there are going to be cover-ups as a result of that, but there are also going to be just accusations of cover-ups. Because you can make accusations all you like, and you don't have to have any facts on your side, particularly when you're a demagogue controlling a mob. And so a lot of the time the accusations are false, and they're just power plays. But the whole sort of rape culture thing, they keep making these false allegations that turn out to be false because of the witch hunt culture. They're out to destroy, particularly fraternities, because fraternities they can't take over because they're too alpha male. And so they're out to destroy them altogether by saying that they all gang rape all the time. And these accusations, at the very least, have all turned out to be false, because they just want to destroy the fraternities. They want to take over the faculties and destroy the fraternities, because one is the path to power and the other is just an obstacle to it.
All right, well, let's
tie
it up and call it a thing for the week. Final thoughts before we shut it down?
Really want to get people to start using the term temporal myopia. Really keen on that. I want to get that out there, yeah.
All right.
Because history and the future, we live in the past and present and the future. Yeah. And always beware of people that ignore the past and the future.
Yeah, they have Platonic ideas. Platonists are dangerous. Okay, well, thanks for coming on for Brain Porn. We'll do it again next Monday. And we'll probably do Hangouts sometime this week. So, thank you, Ed. See you next time. Talk to you soon. I don't know if you've dropped off or something. Your voice is not...
I'm still here.
Oh,
yep.
Okay.
Just waiting for the live to go off.
Oh, yep.